It's fine. It seems to be fine on mine.
Okay. Hello, everyone.
Hi, Wale.
I want to welcome you. Welcome to question and answer today. I'm Wale Oladipo. Some of you've probably attended some of our workshops before. We run workshops and events across the United Kingdom and also overseas. I'm the lead trainer and psychotherapist. It's a pleasure to welcome you back. We're going to be answering different questions today. What I'd like to say is that if you can be on mute to lower the background noises in different houses. So if you want to ask a question, just press the little mute button on your device. If you press it, it's going to have a cross over the button. So that means you're muted. So whenever you want to talk, if you want to ask a question, you can unmute yourself. That will ensure that we have a great experience. It's been wonderful being able to share with a whole bunch of people since the lockdown. So this is our own way of saying, basically contributing our own little way with regards to the mental health of our community. We are going through tremendous challenges, a whole bunch of challenges at the moment. Jane, can you mute yourself, please? If you can just press the little button, the mute, you see the mute button at the bottom. Okay, I'll mute you from here. Yes, I've muted you. So whenever you want to talk, you just unmute yourself. You've just unmuted yourself. Yeah, that's good. Excellent. So we're going through the coronavirus epidemic. We are trying to navigate this as a society, and that has issues with regards to our mental health. We've been inundated with requests and therapy sessions and different other things that people just want to make sure that they are okay with regards to their mind. We know that anxiety is a natural energy, but if we over exposed to negative traumatic events, the healthy anxiety could become toxic, and it starts to feed directly into our survival center. And if we activate our anxiety center too much, we can experience exaggerated physical symptoms of our fight or flight or freeze mechanism. So the purpose of this event is just to look for different ways that we could kind of encourage each other to keep going, not to give up. So I'm going to start the question right now. I've got some questions and people have already posted their questions to me through the email facilities. So if you have any question before I go into my other questions I've got, if you have any question, if those of you who are on the Zoom meeting with me, I would like you to ask your question right now. So you unmute yourself and you just speak. We are all going to be hearing you. If there's any question whatsoever that you've brought with you today. Okay. If there's no question, or maybe you're still preparing your question, I'm going to start with the first question that I've got on my list here. Somebody said, how soon after the traumatic event does post-traumatic stress disorder usually occur? And can PTSD symptoms be triggered by further stress that comes on top of the original trauma? So two questions. The first question, how soon after the traumatic event does PTSD usually occur? Usually between the traumatic experience and the next 3 months. That is what is known as the traumatic stress window. Everybody goes through the intense emotional traumatic reactions when, depending on the intensity and the dosage of the trauma that we've been exposed to. So that means there will be some reactions. There will be some negative reactions, some traumatic re-experiencing, some exaggerated somatic symptoms. We'll have flashbacks between the first 3 months. We have some series of avoidance mechanisms All those things I've mentioned, they are typical symptoms of PTSD. But all those things are expected for the next 90 days, while your nervous system, your what we know as the Hpa axis, which is in charge of your stress regulation, start to readjust. So many people eventually readjust their nervous system, their traumatized nervous system within the 3-month period. And they normalize. When we say they normalize, not that they are 100% okay, but they kind of avoid the chronic PTSD symptoms. Usually about 10 to 15% of everyone who's gone through a potentially traumatic events that will eventually develop PTSD. Not everybody. Somehow, some people manage to kind of normalize, not 100%, but they didn't go on to develop a full-blown PTSD symptoms. So if you're listening, if you're the one who sent that question in, the first 3 months is considered to be the traumatic stress reactions, where people will have that exaggerated symptom, a whole bunch of symptoms of anxiety and distress and emotional distress and re-experiencing on flashbacks, after which it should kind of normalize to a state of a traumatic state, not a PTSD state. And about 10 studies have shown about 10 to 15% will maladapt with regards to the continuity of the PTSD symptoms. Now, the second part of that question is, how can PTSD symptoms be triggered by? Can PTSD symptoms be triggered by further stress that comes on top of the original? Yes. Now, PTSD is one of the psychiatric disorders that is extremely susceptible to relapses because the entire PTSD package involves a very strong level of emotional flashbacks. You always go back to the initial traumatizing distress emotions. So we have flashbacks all the time, and we have especially emotional flashbacks where you abandon awareness and you move into a dissociative state where you start to relive the intense emotions of the initial trauma. So it's very, very common. Many people have gone through PTSD, especially complex PTSD, which is characterized by childhood trauma or repeated or prolonged adulthood trauma. So we experience perpetual emotional flashbacks. And because of that, we can easily be triggered. We can easily be triggered by even, the most innocuous things that basically very, very harmless. But because of the way the nervous system has been shocked, any sensory perception can trigger us. So what we're saying right now is that the biggest trigger of all is another negative life event. If you have PTSD, your repressed emotions are already overfull. They're actually overflowing. So if you have other negative life events coming towards you, it's too much to bear. So negative life events are really the big triggers for anybody. It doesn't matter whether it is PTSD or it is anxiety disorder or it is OCD. When our life experiences intensify with regards to the nature of the negative experiences that we start to experience, the anxiety center within you will have to recruit more workers to cope with the demand of use. So that means your body will experience more symptoms. Now, let me just see whether I could share something with you very quickly, just to put context to this. Now, there's a little brain picture here. If you can see my screen, just give me a thumb up. Can you see my screen? You can see the screen. Can you see the little brain image on my screen? Give me a thumb up if you can. Okay, everybody can see. Good. Gail, can you see me? Can you see the brain image on the screen? Good, good. Excellent.
Can't see the brain image, but I can see the rest of it.
You cannot see the brain image. Okay. Let me make sure that I get that right. Just a moment, please. I will share. I will reshare that with you so that you can see it properly. Okay, you should be able to see it now. There you go. Are you able to see that?
Yeah, I can see it.
Good, thank you. Now, what we do know is that we have a brain that is extremely sensitive to our environment. The brain is the most important neurological bunch of tissues that we have today. So what we do know is that when we are traumatized, different regions of the brain are affected. Especially, we have 3 layers of the brain. We have the brainstem right here. The brainstem is like the survival headquarters. That is where most of our survival decisions are being made. So if you've been traumatized, especially from childhood, chances are you've been placed on the survival list. So that means your threat levels have been calibrated very high. So you need more protection. You need more fight, flight, freeze protection. So that means you are going to be micromanaged by your fight or flight center more, because they realize that life has treated you a lot badly. So you need more fight or flight protection. Now we know that we have the middle part of the brain, which is the limbic system. That's where the emotions are regulated. That's where the thalamus, hypothalamus is. The hypothalamus is the chemical factory. That's where your stress chemicals are produced. And also it's in charge of your homeostatic regulation. Now look at the amygdala here. The amygdala is the fight or flight person. That's the person who fires the fight or flight. It's in charge of emotions and measuring the tones and the intensities of your feelings and emotions. So if you realize is that something has changed with regards to your emotionality, it's going to fire. It's going to consult his friend. Is in the hypothalamic center, in the chemical factory, to start the fight or flight stress chemicals productions. So your adrenaline, your cortisol will be made in the hypothalamic center right there. So the amygdala is always the chief security officer that is always looking after you, making sure that you have the protection that you need. And you experience that in your body as symptoms, even though your anxiety center is trying to help you, but many people think it's against you. So they think it's against them. So they even panic more. So we know that if you've been traumatized, the hypothalamic center has problems, has issues. Why? Because of the excess precursor to cortisol that we produce. It's known as the CRH, corticotropin releasing hormone. So just know it as the CRH. The CRH is the first chemical that is mixed in the chemical factory on your way to producing your cortisol and your adrenaline. So studies have shown that people who've experienced childhood trauma and they've developed PTSD, they've produced too much CRH. And CRH, producing too much CRH is very, very toxic to the entire brain. For example, your hippocampus, which is the memory center. Look at the hippocampus there. It's in charge of your memory. But it doesn't just do memory, it's in charge of your learning capability. It's also in charge of your stress response. It actually helps to calm down your Hpa axis, your hypothalamus, pituitary, and adrenal glands. The pituitary gland is not shown here, but the adrenal glands are on top of your kidneys. So those 3 regions of the brain and body will combine together to regulate your stress response, the most important axis with regards to your stress response. But your hippocampus, your memory center, even though it's famously known as a memory center. It does other functions, such as your ability to learn. Studies have shown that children who've been overly exposed to trauma right from childhood, they can have learning difficulties because of the overproduction of the CRH molecules that will kill the cells in the hippocampus. So that will reduce the functionality of their capability to learn and to retain memories and to be able to socialize. It affects the social engagement pathways. Now we have the other part of the brain, other part of the hippocampus that is responsible for modulating your Hpa axis, hypothalamus, pituitary, and adrenal glands axis. So your hippocampus also reduces your stress response. It helps you to modulate stress. So, but if the CRH has been overproduced and is compromised, the hippocampus, we will have symptoms. Now, linking that with PTSD, flashbacks, which is the PTSD emotional flashbacks are the biggest sources of relapses. Yes, because when a negative life event comes, they trigger you into dissociation. And while you abandon the thinking brain that's supposed to help you to be in awareness and present moment into control, the survivor brain kicks in while you are in a dissociative state. And the survivor brain hijacks everything. So you start to relive the autopilot, hardwired traumatic events that happened that have been encoded in the past. So what happens is that if we overproduce CRH, the CRH is an accelerating peptide. Peptides are like neurons. They're like neurotransmitters. Neurotransmitters do shorter journeys, you can say short distances with regards to passing messages across. But peptides will do long distances. They travel further. So CRH is a peptide. Peptides are amino acids that have more than one amino acid, a group of amino acids. So what we're saying right now is that once you overproduce CRH peptides, they will affect your hippocampus. And because the CRH is also an accelerating neurotransmitter, they make other neurons to stimulate, to get activated, to get fired. So they're more likely to activate another excitatory neurotransmitter called glutamate. Glutamate makes the brain to work too hard. It makes the information of your anxiety to go faster throughout the other regions of the brain. So studies have shown that excess glutamate produced as a result of the excess CRH will make us to be constantly in a dissociative state. People in several studies who they've modulated their glutamate levels. A lot of them, once they've passed a particular threshold of glutamate, they start to have hallucination and dissociative experiences. So we know that glutamate dysregulation is being connected to dissociation, derealization, depersonalization. Don't feel your feelings anymore. You feel as if you are different. You are not yourself. You've been objectified. So we know that trauma doesn't just change brain functions. It actually changes brain structures. And it affects not just the neurological state of our being. It affects everything. It changes our biochemistry. So now looking at that picture, that question again, you realize that it is very easy for anybody who has PTSD to experience triggers based on other life stresses that have been coming through. And we already have a dysregulated Hpa axis and the glutamate pathways. They are overproducing. The hippocampus that is very, very important with regards to your stress regulation is lost some gray matter. Some cells have been degenerated there. So that means we have reduced capacity for emotional regulation. So that does not mean that all those things could not be repaired. But we must understand that it is not your fault if you are going through a lot right now with regards to your symptoms and your regular flashbacks. It is not your fault. You cannot blame it on the weakness of your weakness of your personality. So what we're saying is that it's important to be able to have self-compassion on yourself, even though the road ahead is going to be very tough. But what we also know is that one step at a time, we can repair the brain, can recalibrate the brain as we continue to seek help. So that is that. Another question that is very close. If you have PTSD, we are always be prone to relapses, sometimes during emotional times. I've just answered that. It's very easy to go through relapses because we're susceptible to dissociation, especially emotional dissociative flashback state, based on the changes in the biochemistry of the brain. Okay, so there will be relapses. When you relapse, if you've worked hard on yourself, you are not starting from the scratch again. It's just like it's like it's like the staircase. If you've left the floor level and you've moved to, like, let's say you're on the fourth or fifth step towards recovery, if you have a relapse, you will not go back to the floor. You probably plateau somewhere on the second or the third platform. So you can take some time to recover and you can pick yourself back up. Never give up. Never feel like don't feel as if all the hard work that you've made over the years it's all gone down the drain right now. So there are the flashbacks, but the flashbacks are opportunity. They are opportunities to practice self-compassion. Opportunities to practice self-compassion. Blame it on the trauma, blame it on the brain that has been reconditioned based on the traumatic past. Never blame it on your weakness of character or the willpower. So that is that. It's just yes. So that is that. Now, so that answers about 2 or 3 questions together there. So if you're listening to me right now and you have some questions, you could also ask it. Some of you actually, you can use your chat, your live chat, to ask a question. So another question here. So what is the best way to address the kinds of effects you're talking about? So Bob, the effect of the biochemistry, right? Is that what you mean? You could just unmute yourself and talk me through it so that I know what you're talking about. Bob.
Hello. Hi.
Yeah, go on.
Yeah, I just kind of need some ideas of what is a constructive way forward. If I just explain to you very briefly what's happened. My husband died suddenly at Christmas in what were sort of fairly traumatic circumstances. So the point when the COVID lockdown began was almost exactly 3 months after he died. And I'm just really, really struggling to cope. I suffer from depression anyway, depression, okay, anxiety and mood swings. And I can't work at the moment. And I am sort of starting to feel as though I can't see a way through. So kind of any suggestions on what I could do that would help me to, you know,
so that happens at Christmas.
Yes.
So that is very, very fresh. Now, just going through bereavement is traumatizing enough. But if you've had some pre-existing conditions in the past, that even makes it very, very intense. So my suggestion is that you go through, spend time to really go through this grief period, to go through the grief process that you're going through right now, because all the symptoms you're going through will probably be linked to the past traumatic experience that you've had personally, now aggravated by the sudden loss that you are trying to navigate right now. So we have the grieving process. We have different layers of theories of grief. But when grief is in the mix, we focus on making sure that we have a successful grieving process. That is important first. Now, your symptoms will be exaggerated, but it's always important to remember that it's part of the grieving process. We have exaggerated symptoms. So we have the different theories of grief. One of the most common ones is the one that was developed by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, the 5 stages of grief. And the first one is denial. Then from denial, you go for anger. From anger, you go to bargaining. From bargaining, you go to depression. And from depression, you gradually work your way to acceptance. And this could take ages to complete, and it's not linear. You might think you're in acceptance 1 week. Before you know it, you're back in anger. So there is a fluctuation effect with regards to the different stages of our emotional dysregulation. So we just need enough time to be able to process this. But this situation that we're going through right now is not helpful, the lockdown, because as we try to navigate our way out of our grief process, being able to be around people who could provide safety and stabilization could help us to kind of feel that sense of safety. Very, very crucial. So community and connection, when the time is right, being able to have a support network that will somehow compensate for the ones that we've lost in our loss. That's very important. So I just wanted to know that if it happened, just by Christmas, it's still very, very, very fresh. People that we lose, even though they are no longer in our life, they are still embedded in our neurological tissues. The brain still thinks they are there.
Mm.
So when you start to grieve, the amygdala does not know what's going on. So it increases your fight, flight, freeze response, trying to help you cope better. So plenty of patience on your side. I remember I was in Belfast, delivering a lecture in Belfast, and the lady was in the audience, and she was telling me that everybody has deserted me. They didn't want to talk to me because they thought my grieving process is going too long. We have a society that actually is very, very resistant to a proper grieving process. They'll tell you, go on, just move on, just get on with it. And it's like she's now becoming very traumatized by the fact that people can no longer endure the normal grieving process. And they're actually offering her antidepressants to numb what is supposed to be a natural emotion, grief, when we lose people. So what I would suggest is that a lot of patience is necessary. For a lot of self-compassion patients, it's necessary. Don't repress emotions. If you have to cry, if you have to verbally ventilate, if you have to emote, feel the feelings. Let the emotions go through you. Don't repress. A lot of crying, a lot of angering, a lot of verbally ventilating, and a lot of support network. Having a secure base, somebody that could always be there, like a therapist, maybe over the phone, or somebody that is just very compassionate, that could be with us, that could speak to us whenever our mood swings. Is very crucial. So I hope that is useful.
Yes,
to you.
It is. Thank you.
Good. So any other question at all? Let me just see whether somebody is saying something. Rebecca, yeah, you're saying something here. What does CRH means? What does CRH stand for, rather? Well, you don't want to know the full, the technical name for that. Just know it as CRH. Now, I've just explained that the CRH is corticotropic releasing hormone. It's a peptide. Peptide, I'm going to type that. A peptide is a signature, is a chemical signature of emotions. When you think, and let's say you think negatively, your negative thoughts, they are electrochemical impulses that will have to go into the hypothalamic center. In fact, I've got a picture here to show you where the CRH is actually. Just 1 minute, please. I'll stop sharing this. I'll share a different one. Yeah, I'm sure you can see this. You can see the Hpa axis I've referred to. Hypothalamus, pituitary, adrenal gland. This is the central control center for your stress response. If you've been traumatized, studies have shown that it's the Hpa axis that goes first. It becomes compromised first. So you struggle to be able to regulate your internal emotional state. What is known as your neuroception. Neuroception is the process, the ability of your own internal state to regulate itself relative to what's going on in your environment. So your Hpa axis is in charge of that. So it breaks down. Now look at the CRH here. There you go, the CRH, even they don't even spell it fully in this picture because it's a mouthful. So the CRH is produced first, look at that, in the chemical factory, in the hypothalamus, as I've explained. Then it moves to your pituitary gland, which is that. The pituitary gland is the master gland, like a shuttle box that carries other chemicals to their destinations. Now the CRH moves to your pituitary gland and it becomes something else. It becomes a different peptide known as ACTH, adrenal corticotropic hormone. Now the destination is to get your adrenal gland on top of your kidneys. And there you go, your cortisol is produced. And also your norepinephrine is produced in the brainstem, which goes hand in hand with your cortisol to regulate your stress response. But all these systems are dysregulated in trauma, especially childhood trauma. So they are not working properly. The CRH is overproduced, and when the CRH is overproduced, it compromises other centers in the brain, because it has pathways to your thinking brain. You can't think properly anymore. You have a frozen thinking brain from time to time. You have a sense of, just blanking out, a sense of derealization, the personalization. And also it's in your amygdala. Excess CRH inundates the CRH receptors in the amygdala. So they are instructing your anxiety center that your life is still crazy. So the anxiety center is going crazy, micromanaging you. So the chances that you will have what is known as the amygdala hijacking. So where you just get overrun by emotions from time to time, you get shut down. So these are the things that studies have proven to be very, very common in trauma. So if you don't know that your biochemical state is also traumatized, you blame it on the weakness of not being able to move on too quickly. It takes time for this to regulate. So we ask for a greater self-compassion as we navigate towards recovery. So I hope that is useful for you there. Good. Now, let me just look at this last question that I've got here. A few other ones here, but I'm cautious of my time. It was supposed to be 45 minutes. We're already on 30 minutes, over 30 minutes. So if you have further questions, you could just use the chat box, or if you just unmute yourself, just speak to me as I look for the next question to answer. Now, there's another question here. I'm going to switch to ADHD, if you don't mind. ADHD. Somebody said that I help a client with ADHD to get started on tasks. How can I help a client with ADHD to get started on tasks and projects, and how to finish tasks and projects? So it's the greatest frustration of my ADHD clients. Now, what we do know is that attention deficit hyperactivity disorders is a brain-driven condition that affects both adults and children. And the core foundations of the symptoms focuses on the executive function just behind the forehead. I'm going to share that brain picture with you again. Okay, I'll share a different one with you. Sorry, this one doesn't want to go away. I'm going to minimize that so it should work now. Yes. So if I share that picture with you again, this brain picture, I'm sure you can see it. Just behind your forehead right here, this is your prefrontal cortex. This is your seat of all your executive functions, like planning, organization, like thoughts, like impulse control. Studies have shown that people with ADHD, they have low blood flow to the PFC center. When there's low blood flow to any regions of the brain, that affects functionality. So you can't function properly if you don't have resources or food in your belly. The circulatory system delivers essential resources for the neurons of the brain. So what we are looking at is that for ADHD clients, the entire prefrontal cortex is not carrying its weight properly. So your center of organization for impulse control, being able to inhibit inappropriate thoughts, inappropriate behaviors, being able to make sure that you're on task, you don't procrastinate, you don't just start a project and you refuse to follow through because you've moved to another thing. So we know that all these things are executive function issues, and this has been studied. What we need to do is to approach it not just from a therapeutic angle, but from a biochemical angle. So it's important that they are doing something to help their PFC to reconnect with its genius, which is being able to organize, being able to impulse control. And one of the ways to do that is to find a way to increase dopamine in that part of the brain. Studies have implicated dopamine as the major corporate neurotransmitter for ADHD. Of course, if you're low in dopamine, you will also be low in the precursor to another stress response neurotransmitter, norepinephrine, that I just mentioned. The norepinephrine I just mentioned in the last image, because norepinephrine is produced from dopamine molecules. So if you're low in dopamine, you'll be low in norepinephrine. And norepinephrine is involved in your stress response. So you're more likely to be more anxious as well. Which is in charge of dopamine, which actually processes dopamine. If you look at that movement there, you realize that it has issues. If dopamine is not properly regulated, you actually you go through exaggerated movements. So you become very restless. You can't properly focus to be able to complete tasks. So how can we increase dopamine? Of course, food is the #1 place to start. Your protein foods are dopamine generating foods because they contain the amino acids, building blocks for dopamine in your food, in them. So make sure that so many of our clients with ADHD, they do better on high protein diets and lower carbohydrates, and a lot of exercise. And above all, a coach. Get a coach. Somebody that will be on your business every day to help you through tasks. Coaching has never been so important than it is that we are right now, where we have a lot of distraction. So if you are ADHD, you have a brain that is extremely powerful, but you need to be constantly in a state of direction. You need somebody, not just a chemical, not just a supplement, not just a good food. You probably need to hire a coach somebody that could constantly be by your side, checking on you, making sure that you're on task all the time. And if you deviated, he or she, politely nudges you back to the place where you're supposed to be. So that is that. It's a brain-driven condition that is very genetic. ADHD runs in families. The studies have shown that traumatic life events can also make us to be ADHD, because the entire frontality of the brain is affected in trauma. That's reduced blood flow that's supposed to be used to keep you in awareness, to keep you to be able to be attentive, to be able to follow through tasks, to be able to impulse control. They've been diverted to support in the survival pursuit. So that is that. I hope that has been useful. So any other question at all? I think there's another question here. But I'll just move to trauma again. How do I navigate moving forwards rather than being stuck in freeze mode from stress, trauma, and anxiety? So there's a background note today. So what I've read that. So what I want to say, if you're watching me, is that if you've attended some of our training on trauma, by the way, we have different types of training. If you want to know more about this, let me just share something with you so that you're aware of some things that are available. 1 minute, please. So we have different workshops that you could actually take part in if you're interested. Yeah, there's a website, Mind Body Breakthrough. So if you scroll down, you see upcoming on our webinars. We have the one for grow your practice. If you're a practitioner, you have an idea that you want to develop to profitability. We have treating generalized anxiety and panic coming up. We have the trauma course coming up. Some of you have attended our trauma course. I recognize some names there. Those of you who are here with me on Zoom. Now, this is the Healing Complex PTSD course that we run online. We have the Treating Generalized Anxiety. We have the Intrusive Thoughts course. We have the ADHD and Anxiety Disorder, Managing and Understanding. And we have the OCD course. So we have all those things that you can click through and see to see whether definitely they're going to be helpful, because we spend a lot of time going through to just not just the brain science behind the sufferings, but the recovery pathways. We go step by step into the recovery pathway. Now, if you go to the blog session, there are some free resources on the blog session. Since the lockdown, I've been trying to do this 60 seconds motivations. Now look at this. This is a very powerful meditation here to ease COVID-19 OCD and anxiety. So if you have OCD and anxiety, just click this and you can listen to the meditation. And if you're a practitioner, you can also download the scripts that I use for that meditation. Plenty of meditation at this time will reduce anxiety. So this is the meditation here. You can download that. I published the script that I use for this. So we have a whole bunch of free stuff and also purchase stuff if you're interested. Now, what I want to share with you is that if you've attended our trauma course before, there are 3 levels that trauma will go through. The trauma recovery phases will go through 3 phases. The first phase is stabilization. The second phase is metabolization, and the third phase is reconnection. So you stabilize, then you metabolize the traumatic experiences, you digest them, you make sense of them, and you go through a proper grieving process. And the last one is to reconnect back to life, to dreams, to passions, to personal goals, and to trusting again. So the initial stage that you have to deal with, if you're listening to me based on this question, is safety. And as we always say in the course, if you're still being exposed to sources of re-traumatization, it's hard for you to heal. Yes. So based on the background story that I've read about this question, You're still being exposed to your mother, who is over controlling, who has been a source of pain to you, and also your sister, who has been nasty to you. And that has been going on for many years. So you are not totally out of the source of your trauma. So that will slow down the recovery. This, over 75–85% of our joy and happiness is attached to relationships, because we are relational beings. The brain is a relational organ, especially when your source of trauma is connected to people who are very close to you. It's one of the most challenging recovery pathways to navigate. There's a good book, a old book, actually an old book. It's actually almost out of print now, that I read many years ago. It was probably done in the first part of the 20th century or something. It's called How to Divorcing Mom and Dad. How to Divorce Mom and Dad. Especially people who've been traumatized by parents. Recent studies have shown that over 85% of us who suffer from complex trauma, our traumas were inflicted not by strangers, but by our parents. Absolutely correct. That is incredible. Parents, over 85%. So many of our traumatic events that we couldn't recover from until other ones come along when we're adults, they started from childhood traumatic events. So how can you? I read that your sister, you've caught some conversations with your sister. You don't feel guilty about it. This could be a time just to relax, just to work on yourself, because even speaking to your sister can be a trigger to you. So the fact that she initiated the breaking of the relationship, it protects you a little bit. So focus on your recovery right now. And I know that the pathway to your mother is still very active. You feel like you have to call her, but if she has become the very strong source of your trauma, and she's become the source of your triggers, you can reduce the contact and don't feel guilty for it. If you have some time out to work on you, you will have the expanded capacity in your mind to be able to show more compassion, show more help later on. But you are the most important asset right now, your mind. If you're not right, nobody around you can enjoy you. So don't feel guilty that you're taking some time out and limit access to sources of threat. Your amygdala knows that there's some people, there's some voices that are as dangerous in your life. So when you move towards this voice, you make your amygdala to go crazy. So it starts to panic and it starts to hijack your emotions, thinking, what are you doing? You're supposed to be running away. Everybody runs away from the sources of danger, unless you are a superhero like the Spider-Man or something. So, but if you, because they're so close to you, these are your families, and you're constantly moving towards them, because that seems to be a natural thing to do. You are doing that at the expense of your amygdala. I know you're an adult. If you're a child, that's different. You're an adult. You have the capacity. You make your own money. You have the capacity for independence. So you could use that and limit your sources of traumatization. That is after we've done that, then we can now use all these elaborate skills and techniques to help you to normalize the safety first. So I hope that's useful. So ladies and gentlemen, it's Wale Oladipo here. I hope this has been helpful to you. I hope this has been helpful to you. It's been wonderful. Anybody want to say anything? Maybe you want to say that you enjoyed the session. It's always nice to hear people, the people telling me how this has gone so far. Oh yeah, go on. You can just speak.
I thank you very much. Thank you for this information, and I will go away and think about it and do my own research. And I think it's very useful to see the pictures of the brain and the parts of the brain, because I know that our primitive brain is very powerful, isn't it?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Very, very powerful. Oh, thank you. Thank you, Jane. I'm glad to get feedback. Any other person want to say something before I sign off?
Just to say thank you. Yes, thank you from me too. That was really useful.
Oh, thank you, Bob. Just keep going, and take as much time as possible.
Thank you, Wale. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. Frankie, great. I remember that name. Did you just attend one of the courses recently?
Yes, I did. I've done your trauma one.
Okay.
And
okay.
I've done another one as well. Okay,
that name is very familiar now.
I'll keep popping up.
That's good.
Popping back down again.
So thank you very much, everyone. It's been wonderful sharing with you.
Thank you.
All the very best. We're going to schedule another time. It's usually the same link that we use. So if you know, and if you put out dates there, you want to join again, you can reuse the link, but I will always send the link out a day before. So the very best, everyone. Thank you very much.
Please, goodbye, everyone.
You.
Go on our Facebook page, leave some comments, help us review it, so that other people can benefit later on. Not the very best. Speak to you soon.
See
ya.
Bye.